It's funny when you say that. So our kids won't like it if we talk about them. Well, then let's not talk about our kids. Then can you not hear?
Just need a little bit more volume. That's better.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yeah. More?
No. I'm
Less.
sorry. Yeah.
Less.
A little less.
A little less.
That's good.
That's good.
Good.
All right, we're gonna leave it there. Let's make sure we're recording. We are. We're good. I'd hate to have a redo of a couple weeks ago.
Might get better.
So if we talk about our kids but don't say that we're talking about our kids, we could just say my friends' children.
Totally fair game.
Right, there you go. Because you know how the whole psychologist thing where they say, okay, my friend has an issue that I wanted to talk to you about, so we'll talk about my friend's kids.
Yeah.
Okay, but let's not talk about kids right now. It's total aside. I have to start with something totally that's different than what we're going to talk about. But I was thinking the other day about the letters after people's names. And I know that you have some letters after your name, and I think those letters are useful. Sorry, not the letters. The letters are not useful at all, but the education that you got that allowed you to put letters after your name. And I know you don't use those letters after your name. I know you rarely ever use them, and so I didn't bring it up to embarrass you. But I was just thinking about how we respect those letters in people, and we actually give people titles because of those letters, right? And I thought what's really interesting to me is the distinction between academia and profession. And so, for example, you come from a family of business owners, and I come from a family of business owners, and I am a business owner. And I think 14 years, and please, this is not patting myself on the back. I'm just thinking about everybody who spent. So let's. I want to make the comparison real quick, and you tell me if I'm totally off base here. Someone spends 20, 30 years as a business owner working 50, 60, 70 hours a week in a specific, well, not just specifically, but owning a business or what. It doesn't have to be owning a business. It's any career of really kind of in the trenches doing specific work that requires a real, a knowledge of what they're doing. And they, instead of getting letters after their name or any kind of title, sometimes they get people just dismiss, like a plumber, a good, really, really good plumber. Someone who's been a plumber for 20 years that gets paid really, really well for what they do, or 30 years. We don't give them any letters or give them the same kind of clout as someone who went to school for 4 years and then decided to go to school for another 4 years and read a lot of books, did a lot of research, and wrote some really good papers, and then had to defend their ideas, right? Yeah. And so I was just thinking, sometimes we don't give the social respect or clout to people who are really good at their trade, that we do for people who studied for a long time. And I don't know why we don't. Like a plumber that's been a plumber for 20 years should have a PhD in plumbing. More than that, he shouldn't. And I didn't mean to mention the letters, but you know what I mean. I don't know. Maybe you disagree with me, and it's okay if you do.
I think it's
just out of left field. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it's our location. I think we live because you're in Charlottesville and you're at UVA and you got all these government installations and federal government, local government, state government, all is around us. I think people get caught up in a lot of that, maybe in this area,
maybe
more so than other areas. And plus, you're a stone's throw from Washington D.C. and that whole corridor of D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York. You're just in this whole. And those
people really care. What school did you go to?
Yeah. I mean, it becomes what's your pedigree? What's this? What's that?
The pedigree thing. Yeah.
I think God takes us, like the way I try to perceive that, and is I'm no better than someone else who. There's a lot of pastors who have no real academic background, and I can kind of come to that and say, oh, you didn't do this, or you didn't go here, or you didn't do that. Or you can look at it and say, there were two educational paths here. One was more either self-directed, but I would say God used both of them. God took me one path, God took this guy one path. It doesn't mean that I can't learn anything from him or he
Yeah.
can't learn anything from me. It's just two separate paths. And I think when we start to emphasize, well, I've got this particular background and,
Yeah.
it makes me more able to speak to this particular issue or dynamic than you do because you don't have that particular
Yep.
background. I think, obviously that's very prideful and
Yeah.
unnecessary. But I think there's a lot of I'm just saying me personally, and it's probably because I grew up around it. I grew up on a farm. I grew up with guys who didn't have a lot of education and
But a lot of wisdom.
They knew how to get stuff done.
Yeah.
And so, I was just talking with a guy this morning who's a heavy equipment operator, does septics and, all that sort of stuff. And, I assume he finished high school probably, but I'm certain not beyond that.
Yeah.
But the guy has tons of wisdom how to get stuff done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, how to make it happen. He knows what he's doing. And even the guys who have the education who kind of like, for instance, in septics and all that, he told me, he said, if you can get this guy, he said, if he'll do it, he's the one that you need to get to do it, because he does stuff so well. And so you have to respect the two dynamics of how people get to where they are and learn what they learn. I think when you become full of yourself with your background and education, you try to become prideful in yourself, you really lose out.
Yeah.
I think that is a real key. When we think too highly of ourselves, and I think the Bible really points to this, we start thinking too highly of ourselves, we lose out on the benefit of learning from other people. And there is so much to learn.
Yeah. I think the one thing that concerns me, and I think we're starting to realize it, I actually think we're waking up to this, the conversations I've heard people having, is that we've spent a lot of time and attention over the past, 40, 50, 60 years, emphasizing passing down educational information in academia from generation to generation to generation. But we haven't spent as much time and effort making sure all of the know-how, hands-on knowledge, apprenticeships type stuff, that we are retaining that and preserving that. We're not preserving that. And it's literally going away it has gone away in a lot of places. I was watching a documentary the other day, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take too much time on here, but I watched a documentary the other day about the tool and die industry because someone wanted to manufacture something in the United States. It's he's a Christian guy. I want to manufacture a product in the United States with zero imports, with especially nothing from China, because everything comes from China these days. And he tried his hardest. And what he realized was even creating the tools, the tooling for an injection mold, if you know what injection mold is, the tooling, we have almost completely lost the ability to go and have tooling manufactured in the U.S. for an injection mold. That always goes out overseas. It goes to China. They've become the preeminent tool and die shop China has. And it was really interesting because he said, and he talked to an older guy and he said in the documentary, this guy has died since I started this documentary. So this guy is no longer here. And the information that he hadn't passed on to the next person, he had passed some of it on, but he said, it's gone. It's not here anymore. We don't have it anymore. So the only thing, I think we emphasize sometimes, too often we emphasize one thing at the expense of another. And so we emphasize what academics get you because this assumption that our kids should go to college, I know we've had this conversation, but should go to college, and maybe that's fading a little bit because the value we have placed on that over the years is far and above my kid is apprenticing with a plumber or an electrician or a framer or a septic guy, know. Mm-hmm. And I think what we need to do is realize that, there's real value. And not to mention that I think there's a lot more value. It's a pendulum that has swung, and is swinging back the other direction. Sorry, that was a crazy aside, and I apologize for that.
I would just say,
go for it.
I think both have to have you got to have a humility about you.
Yeah, for sure.
And be willing to learn from other people. I think that is a real key to enjoying life.
Yeah, I agree.
Being able to be around other people and simply listen and learn. I remember Nicole, my wife, had a cousin, and he was one of the top guys up in Michelin tire manufacturing.
Yeah.
So he was, he would be all over the world doing stuff. Really good guy. But and this was, I had most interactions with him when we lived around in that particular area where they were, and I was probably in my early 20s or whatever, and he was in his 50s, 60s at the time. He passed away way too early. But anyway, you could sit down and talk to him, and it was like he genuinely listened to every word. And you come to find out later, like, he had such a broad worldview and knowledge of so many different types of subjects and everything else. But when you were talking to him, he made you feel like the information you were relaying or communicating about or whatever was just, he was very interested. And it wasn't like a fake kind of put on. Yeah. He was genuinely interested in what you had to say and what your thoughts were on certain subjects.
That's a really good point.
And I always remember that. And I thought, that's how I want to be.
Yeah, it's funny because I had so to qualify what I was saying, so I don't feel like I'm coming down on too hard on one side, I've known PhDs who have been very interested in the plumber that visits and does plumbing in their home, and they want to know, and they're very approachable, and they understand the value of that. And I've seen PhDs who are snooty and couldn't care less about the person who's serving them in some respect. I've seen people on the non-academic side that have thought that PhDs are just a bunch of uptight, and then I've seen people that can really sit down and have a great conversation with people that have been educated in academia. And so you're right. It's all about being open to the fact that I'm not the end all, right? There are people around me, and they may have taken a different track in life and done something differently. And so maybe I wonder if the question originally was a little bit of a defensive one because I don't have a PhD, but I feel like...
Well, I would say one more thing on that topic, which I think is important.
Yeah.
And I had a professor explain this to me in seminary when I was pursuing more education, and he said, remember, your PhD is you are researching one pixel in a screen. Yeah. So if you want to say you're an expert in one pixel. And I think there's this broad kind of perception that, this person has, this doctorate in whatever, or their education is focused in this. So they're an expert in a broad field. But actually, you're only considered an expert in a very, very tiny, minute area of another field that may be part of a broader discipline. And I think some people who have doctorates try to come off like they're broad experts, and you do pick up some ideas that help you be inquisitive in other areas, or some ways to be inquisitive in other areas. But in terms of, true expert in a particular field, it's one pixel in a screen. It's not very broad. It's very, very specific. And if you began to read dissertation titles, you'll see that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That it's very narrow and very deep.
It's a very, very narrow area.
One of my best, a dear friend of mine was one of the smartest people I've ever known, but one of the most down-to-earth, Dr. Rita Schnipke. And when I say Dr. Rita Schnipke, it's because she had really earned a reputation of being extremely valuable in her industry. And she actually rarely ever used the doctor thing, and I didn't even know that she had a doctorate until there was a comment made about her license plate one time. Anyway, all that said, she told me a story one time of someone. She said, one of the smartest guys I ever knew in a specific field. She told a story of when he was done with his, I think I've told you this, when he was done with his Christmas tree one season, he decided it'd be a good idea to very slowly and gently feed it into the fireplace. And the rest is pretty obvious what happened. This was a PhD. This was a guy, very, very intelligent guy in the field, that deep and narrow field that he had concentrated his studies in, but didn't have the common sense to know that if you stick a dead tree into a fireplace, the fire's not going to remain in the. Anyway, that was I love that story. I thought it was great that she shared that with me. All right, what I wanted to talk about. Have you ever heard and I don't know if this is just a I don't know if there's any true. I think it's true. I heard it as kind of a little bit of a story with a lesson behind it. How an eagle deals with its small eaglets in the nest. I've heard that what an eagle does, the eagles, both the male and female, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure, prepare the nest with all kinds of feathers and soft moss and everything. And so when they lay the eggs and the eggs hatch and the little eaglets are in the nest, and I can't remember how many they have. I think they only have a few. They don't have a bunch. That over time, as the little eaglets grow, they start to pull the feathers and moss and fuzz out of the nest. The parents do. Little by little by little by little. And as the eaglets get bigger and bigger and bigger, it becomes a less and less comfortable nest for them. So one day it makes sense that they would kind of spread their wings and jump out because it's not comfortable like it was originally. All right. So when the topic that I proposed to you was this idea of, and I said it in a way, I don't even know if it's the right way to phrase it, but elective hardship, taking difficult things and introducing them into our lives and the lives of our children. Sorry, mic there. Lives of our children for no other reason. Well, I would say not no other reason, but for the express reason of kind of toughening us up a little bit, making us more, just tough, resilient, and having to do that intentionally, because in an era where things like I'm one of the when I'm writing a text, I'm so irritated. I think I've mentioned this before. I'm so irritated when it's constantly telling me what I want to say. When I'm writing a text, don't tell me what I want to say.
Yeah.
I never ever let it autocorrect my words. I never ever let it finish my sentences because I'm frustrated with the idea that technology now wants to finish my sentences. I don't want technology to finish my sentences. I want to grind it out with my little thumbs, and I want to say what I want to say, even if it's not the most fluid way to say it. I want it to be mine.
Yeah.
And so that's one small example of, it's not hardship, but not allowing things to be too easy. And I fear that we are becoming, and we're allowing our kids to become soft, and we're not intentionally plucking out the feathers from underneath them and creating some hardship for our kids that teaches them to be tough. Because, and then it's no wonder that 20-somethings aren't tough and 30-somethings aren't tough. And you've got men that act like children and people that can't contain their emotions, or you're wondering why they're going off on social media or whatever, because they've not learned to grow up and toughen up. Does that make sense? I mean, there's some examples of things that I think we should introduce into the lives of our children or ourselves even, but that idea, that concept.
Well, I think,
what are your thoughts?
The impression of Scripture, particularly Paul's writings to us, talk about hardship producing within us, or tribulation producing certain fruits, ultimately hope, but that it's good because it produces perseverance and other things, And I think evaluating, what the reason is, I think there's one thing to make things hard just to be hard, just because I want to have a hard personality, particularly as it relates to my kids. I want them to feel like I'm hard. I want them to, I think there's another reason to walk through something and it be tough. And I would even go so far as to say, when we're intentionally making things challenging to help grow our kids, it's probably even more important for us to be present with them through the challenge. Similar to how, the Lord says, I'm not going to leave you without someone to be with you in the tribulation that you're going to experience in the world. I'm going to pray that the Holy Spirit will come and be with you. And so I think, there's got to be an aspect of both an understanding of tribulation producing growth or trials producing growth, but also an understanding that I'm not alone in this, I think.
Yeah. I think here's an example that I was just thinking about how I think has changed through generations in a way that's not healthy. I would say in our agrarian culture 100 years ago, 200 years ago, every part of the family, every member of the family had tasks that they had to do to contribute to the well-being of the family, right? And then the industrialization of society and things changed a little bit. And I think in my childhood, here's what it became in my childhood. In my childhood, it became, okay, you have tasks that contribute to the well-being or the welfare of the family, but you're going to get an allowance for it, right? You're going to get paid to do these chores, right? And I think if I were to say, how many kids today get an allowance, I don't think that's a real common thing, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's probably more common for the kids not to have to do anything that is, I would say, and then maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But in many families, there's no expectation that every member of the family does something, not clean your room, not make your bed, that contributes to the well-being of the family. Take care of the community spaces, the dishes, the cooking, the things like that everyone kind of contributes and jumps in and does part of that. That had gone from, it was expected, 100, 200 years ago in our culture, and not just expected, it was necessary, right? To becoming something that you are still expected to do, but you got paid to do it.
Yeah.
To now, I would think maybe it's not even an expectation in most homes. Am I wrong? Do you think I'm off there? I'm wondering if I'm being too harsh on our society, Western society.
No, I don't. I think there is less of an expectation because there's this prolonged adolescence. When you look in Scripture, there's no sense of adolescence in the Bible in terms of an actual period of its childhood and then adulthood. And we've prolonged this period of adolescence, which can extend 10, 15, 20 years or more.
Yeah.
And I think that's been, I think it has been a real negative on society. I think the other thing is, so like my grandparents' generation, 3 of my 4 grandparents all came from families with more than 10 kids. And so and again, I'm not just, I know my family is big, but I personally did not come from a big family.
Yeah.
But I'm learning through having a larger family. Yeah. One person can't do everything, or 2 people can't do everything in a large family.
Yeah.
There's a requirement that kids learn how to manage certain things. And even that, as they get older, there is a sense you need to start doing some things on your own. You need to start managing some things on your own. But you also need to help participate in the family in a certain way. You're not just an island out there on your own doing your own thing. And I think that's even more so than actually, and I do think helping young people or encouraging young people to take the harder route is important. But I think even more so than that would be to say you have responsibility to something greater than yourself. If I only have to answer to me my whole life, then
why?
It's just a pretty easy run. I'm just whatever. But if I learn at a young age, I've always got responsibilities for others. Others are counting on me. Others are expecting something from me, or to do something with me, or me to assist with something. I actually think that's a much better way and brings a much more holistic perspective of oneself and an understanding of oneself. It creates an environment where you're not so selfish.
Yeah.
Because when you grow up and everything is done for you, you come to expect everything to be done for you.
Have you ever seen one of those little purse dogs?
Oh, yeah.
That you can tell by looking at those little purse dogs that they think the world revolves around them, because the world of the person that's carrying them around, or the dogs in the strollers, the baby strollers, and you think the world revolves, and you can see it when you look at them. You could see it when you look at a dog like that. Oh, I am God.
Yeah.
I am God. And so that's actually an old joke I heard. A dog says to a cat, man, my owner feeds me and pets me and does all these things for me. He must be God. And a cat says, my owner gives me everything I want, feeds me, pets me. I must be God. And I think that's the difference between dogs and cats. But it's also, if you think, if the world is centered around a person, a little person, and then that focus and constant caring for never changes.
Yeah.
If it never changes, then you create very self-centered children. And same with us. If I think everything's about me, I am going to be not just self-centered in the prideful sense, self-centered in the insecure sense. Yeah. There's nothing worse for my personal confidence than feeling like, oh my goodness, it's all about me. Like and so here's one of the things I was thinking as I was thinking through this. The reason why we encourage our kids, and I know you guys have certain things. I mean, like learning instruments or music, or even getting up and serving in church. Mm-hmm. Find a place of service. Find a place to serve in church. Yeah. That's something that's not comfortable for a lot of people. Yeah. Some of your extroverted kids might be like, sure, no problem. Your introverted kids are like, oh gosh, please don't make me greet, or don't make me get on stage, or don't make me do this or play an instrument or whatever. But listen, we do this because it creates in you, and here's what I would say it does. I would say confidence is typically a result of competence.
Yeah.
Right? If I'm competent in something, that creates in me a level of confidence, right? If I know that I'm good at something because I did the hard task of every day practicing it or pushing myself outside my comfort zone to have to do it, even public speaking. That was one of the things that we learned early on. Our kids can all get up in front of, this would not be something that we would have incorporated in our education, but thank goodness, because of the cooperative that we're part of, they had to, every week when they got together as a class, every single person had to get in front of the class and do a presentation. My name is so-and-so, and today I'm going to talk about something, right? And so that public speaking thing, they're competent with being able to speak about some issue in front of a group of people.
Yeah.
Talk about some confidence that creates, because the opposite is, if I'm not competent, if I've never forced myself to do something, and that's a tough one. Mm-hmm. That is the number 2, I think, fear of humanity.
Public speaking.
Right,
yeah.
Public speaking, death and public speaking.
Yeah.
And then public speaking in front of a bunch of people and dying, I guess. It would be
dying while you're doing public speaking?
Combine those two. But I think competence creates confidence. So then how can we create competence? Well, you can't be competent in anything unless the whole 10,000 hour thing, unless you force yourself to do the hard stuff to create cooking. I think about my kids. My wife has done a great job over the years of kind of bringing my kids into the kitchen and teaching them a few of them, a couple of them. But I don't know if there's certain things. I don't know what your thoughts are about competency and how that creates confidence, or what you've done, what you and Nicole have done, or forced your kids. What's an expectation? Is there an expectation in your house of something that everybody contributes to, that's something not necessarily that they want to do, and whether it's serving in church or whether it's something around the house? Or
Well, I would say the first thing is everybody has chores, and we learned very early on, whatever size your family is, that's the size it takes to make the house run.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't all fall to one person or 2 people or whatever to kind of make sure that the house is together. So everybody has to participate. And that's been a big aspect of our family for a very long time. And Nicole even creates a schedule of chores. And we don't do allowances. We don't do any of that thing. There's just responsibility of being part of a family.
Allowances, you get to eat.
Yeah, you have a bed.
Right, we're going to air condition your room.
Those sort of things, So, there is an expectation of all of our kids of saying, you need to serve in church somewhere. You need to have a place of service. And we do not press them on what that area of service is going to be. They can choose that. If there is an area that we see needs help, there's times when I'll say, hey, can you serve here? We need help today.
Yeah.
And I think that's good. I think it's good for them to know I don't always have to be in my comfort zone. For instance, if I'm gifted musically, it doesn't mean I can't teach a Bible study if necessary or do something else. If there's a need, I want to be able to help meet the need, maybe not forever, but, to help fill in the gap, I'm happy to do that. And then we haven't given all of our kids formal music lessons, but we have encouraged music, particularly because for us, that's been the more realistic route. As a large family, we talked about this a little. I would love to have pressed them more into the athletic realm. It became overwhelming for us early on.
Especially in Charlottesville.
When we did it.
Athletics in Charlottesville is crazy and it's expensive. It's hard to do something cheap in athletics. We're going to talk about athletics in a second, but sorry, music.
But there's been a trade-off for that. I mean, thankfully, particularly in the boys and the girls to an extent, they're learning to, the boys wanting to lift weights and stuff like that, which is good for them.
Yeah.
But for us, particularly, music has been something that we've been able to manage with a large family. And I think you see a lot of large families do that. You'll see them tend to focus more on music lessons because it tends to be one time a week. When you start getting practices and games and stuff, just you're on the road all the time. Yeah. We've seen families who've done that, and that, not to get off track here, but that limits a lot of time for what is absolutely necessary. And that is the other thing that we have, and for a family to invest in the discipleship of your own kids. That's a hard thing too, because everything competes for that time.
Yeah.
And having the opportunity to ultimately be responsible for the discipleship of your own kids is a really important aspect.
Yeah.
And again, that is a hard thing because so many things compete against that.
Yeah. Music is not something that we really implemented, or other than I got a kind of a weighted keyboard for our house one time because one of our kids showed some real interest in it, and he's taken it up, just learning mostly by ear, but taking some lessons. But the one thing that we decided years ago to do was swimming in particular. Now, swimming can get crazy in Charlottesville. So can soccer. So can, I'm trying to think, baseball. It all gets crazy in this area. It's nuts. The amount, when I say it, you'd be dumbfounded at the amount of money that you can spend to be in travel soccer, travel baseball, travel lacrosse, year-round swimming, all these things. When you hear year-round swimming or travel, anything, if it has travel in front of it, that means I'm going to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars a year because I'm going to events out of town, staying in a hotel, many, many weekends out of the year. It's crazy. And so anyway, all that said, it's a little intimidating and daunting, and you're thinking, I can't afford all that. One thing we did do was we got involved in swimming in the summers because we wanted our kids to be able to swim. That was a competency we wanted them to have. Yeah. And so what we did was we said, and the story is around that, and that was hard, by the way. That was because someone said, "Oh, join a swim team." Like, no, I want to teach them to swim. No, join a swim team. I'm telling you, join a swim team. And I'm like, you're not hearing what we're saying. And they're like, you're not hearing what I'm saying. Join a swim team. Trust me. And so we did. And I remember, and we talk about it to this day, two of our children, one of them, I think Levi was probably 7, and Benjamin was probably 5. It might have, and they had to jump into their first swim meet, and they were barely swimming. They were barely staying above water. But their first swim meet was at a big pool, crowd, and they were literally, and Ben doesn't mind me saying this, but he was literally standing at the edge of the pool crying.
Oh.
And I was just, oh my God, I felt like a terrible parent. And it was one of the hardest things, seriously, of parenting a small child that Brandy and I had to do, was to watch my son, who was terrified. But he could stay above water, but the whole scenario was just crazy. Swim meets are nuts. But we talk about it to this day. People say, so how did you develop this kind of, this in Benjamin, this, I'm going to walk across the country, whatever. I say, well, it started when he was this big. He was probably 5. This big, And we forced him. He begged us not to force him to do it. We forced him to participate in the swim meet. And he barely made it halfway across the pool, right? Because that's what it was, a 25 meter. When they're little bitty, they do 25. It was a 50-yard pool. He did halfway and stopped. And that first swim meet was tough. It was so hard. And you think, okay, Tobey, you're exaggerating. No, I'm telling you, we had a lump in our throat the whole time. Brandy and I are just holding back tears and thinking, what are we doing to our children? This is going to be traumatic. And it was the exact opposite. What it did was it eventually created a level of competence in them that was confidence inspiring. They had this new confidence when they learned how to swim and swim well. And Ben was really good. And this confidence in them that when I look back, it's because we forced them to do something really, really hard. It's like pushing someone up in front of a crowd and saying, I want you to speak, or I want you to do something. And I think, that said, I think too often as parents, and I'm not patting ourselves on the back because I'm not saying it was the right thing to do, by the way. Yeah, I am saying that. For us, it was. But what it did was it made us realize, oh, okay, this is part of the pain of parenting that produces good fruit, is forcing our children to do something that feels like it's hurting them, but I know that it's creating character in them. Yeah.
And again, I think that's a biblical plan. Paul talks about trials and tribulations, producing perseverance, producing character, producing hope ultimately, and that hope doesn't disappoint. So I mean, in the Christian life, our Father sort of does that same thing with us. I mean, trials are not foreign to the Christian. Tribulations are not foreign. Tests are not foreign. Tests from the Lord, and all those things produce character within us that I think is really important. And you look at people who've managed hard things well in their life.
Yeah.
And they have a confidence and a peace about them that is, I think, is an important aspect of one's development. And I would also say, we can point the finger particularly at younger people and say, you guys got to do hard things and go through trials and all that kind of stuff. But we've already paid our dues. We don't have to do that anymore. Yep. And I think that's a very wrong perspective.
I was going to say, what do you do? What are some of the things that you force yourself to do that you don't want to do? Because I think that's one of the things. I think that's one of the things that people think, oh, once you reach a certain age, you don't have to do that anymore. But what are the things that you force yourself to do that you don't want to do, but you have to do them if you're going to continue to create good fruit, produce good fruit in your life?
Well, I'd pick up on one thing before I would answer that, is that.
Did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No. It's important. It's important for us to continue to prioritize our own development, or else you do just coast through your older years of life when you can actually have, I think, more impact than you can in your younger years.
It's a really
of life.
Good point.
I have more opportunity to influence younger people now than what I ever have in my whole life.
Right.
And I'm very, very thankful for it. But if I don't continue to develop myself in certain ways, they're going to see right through it, and it's do what I say, don't do what I do.
Right.
And so that's not a way of walking in integrity. And I'm using that word in terms of, you want what you say, you also want to be striving to do those things. And whether that is continuing to develop your spiritual walk, continuing to think about, things in your life that need to be either improved or worked on, character development issues. There's still a lot of character development issues that I want to work on. I want to become better at in my life. But I also think it goes down to things such as, whether that's exercise, whether that's picking up a new hobby. I mean, I'm trying to learn Spanish at 48, and really grasp it. But and there's a couple of reasons why. One, just a practical reason, because I like interacting in missions with and the Latin American culture. We have, people in our church who are part of that. But it's also the fact that at my age, I don't want to say I'm too old to learn a language well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want, and so I'm going to make the investment to take classes, which has actually been a real blessing. I want to be able to develop more time on it, but it's actually been a real blessing. I meet twice a week with someone from Honduras who doesn't know English very well. And I thought, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work out. But it's actually been a really good way to begin to pick up and to interact. And it's hard.
But here's the shortcut that you're not taking that you could. Why not just use Google Translate on your phone?
Yeah.
I'm seriously. And that's what most people would say. Actually, not most people. I'm sorry. Some people would say, well, that's dumb, Robert.
Yeah. I've been known to be dumb.
What are you doing? You have a smartphone. You have Google Translate. Have you not seen how that works?
Yeah.
You just put it down. You say English to Spanish, Spanish to English. Conversation. You can actually speak Spanish, and English, and it's gonna produce a little Spanish translation for the person across from you, and then they're gonna speak Spanish. It's gonna English translation. You're thinking that's that easy.
Yeah.
There's a smartphone. Why would you force yourself to learn Spanish when you've got this device in front of you? And the truth is, people would say, well, that device might not always be there. I think there's something deeper. I really do. It's not that even if we had the guarantee that the device would always be there, there's something different about forcing yourself to learn Spanish than to just say, oh, I'm just going to rely on the device in front of me because this works.
Well, you think about... maybe it'd be a humorous illustration, maybe not for some people, I don't know. But you think about someone who's kind of way overweight and out of shape. You can go to the hospital and a doctor and you
staple
can
your stomach. It's Ozempic now, by the way.
You can do all the medical route. And for some people, I realize there's a necessity of that. But I'm talking about for someone who's capable of doing it themselves, a more difficult way. You can take someone who can go to the hospital, go under the knife, have liposuction, lifts, whatever, and they come out on the other side and they still look, you're like, there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
Even when you look at them, like they might think they look good, but in my opinion, like you can tell someone who does all that versus someone who's put in all the work and all the energy to be able to who's been in the gym, who's been exercising. And just like with language.
That's because the transition's not just skin deep. It's much deeper.
It affects a lot of different areas of your mental, outlook as well. And I think for a language as well, I can use Google Translate or whatever, but you never actually get in the door since I'm learning Spanish, in the Hispanic culture using Google Translate.
Correct.
You never actually get.
That's because there's a distance between you and that person. If I can't speak the same language as you, there is a little bit of a wall, and now that wall is here. But you're right.
It's a big wall. It's a big wall to me, you know. So the hard thing is, okay, I want to get from point A to point B. I can shortcut and take the easiest route, but I never reap the benefit if I take the difficult route and get there, and then I actually get to interact with these people and have fellowship in a way that I was never able to before.
I'd like to understand that a little better, because I think there's something to that. What is it about learning the language of somebody that then endears them to me? What is that? Is there something them hearing me speak their language is I think if I were to, I'm going to answer my own question. Sorry, it was rhetorical, and then I'm going to answer it. If I were to kind of speculate, I think it's because they feel valued because I put in effort and expended energy. Sorry to hit a mic. Expended energy to make the connection with them. I did something to come closer to them, to be able to speak to them directly. And what endears me to them is the fact that I worked, I did something, I put in effort, I paid the price to be able to speak to them, and I think it's the reason why people feel runners, that talk to each other, feel some kinship, and people who do hard stuff. It's the reason why one of the closest fraternities, and I say that in the generic sense, not the college sense, in life, is people who went into literal physical battle together because they have a shared, hard, very difficult, really stressful and tenuous experience that they shared together. And so they both did the work, and there was some effort involved. And I think that's the reason why, speaking someone's language, because they know you did the work. It's not, you didn't take the easy, we didn't do the shortcut. You didn't take you spent something to get to the point where you can talk to them.
I would also suggest that this is probably part of the reason for high levels of anxiety and other things within our culture, is because people have not had the experience of coming out on the other side of hard things.
Yeah.
So whether it's the government rushing in to take care of housing, food, education, all these things, here, we'll do it for you. Whether it's parents rushing in to do those things, whether it's others, when you don't have, so if someone has always carried me from point A to point B and I've never had to do it myself, then I have no confidence that I can do it.
Yeah.
And so
zero. Why would you have confidence that you can do it?
Right. If I ever had to do it, I'm going to have a high level of anxiety that I'm going to fail, or there's going to be, some kind of problem, something's going to happen. And so I think that's why we're seeing more levels of anxiousness and other things, because people don't have a confidence in their ability to overcome certain challenges or certain odds. I think that's probably due to, higher rates or a product of that is higher rates of suicide and other things.
Right.
People
Hopelessness.
are not able to cope.
Right. Yeah.
So there is real benefit of walking through challenges. Now, I do think in your analogy of like going through war and things like that, you can't just walk through hard spots and go through hard things. And again, sometimes we can intentionally design hard things to walk through. Sometimes as a believer, the Lord has hard things for us to walk through. And I think those unexpected hard things, you can't just plow through them and get on the other side and not have time to evaluate and come to some sort of conclusion about what happened. Like, I do think there is an importance to evaluating hardship. So if I don't deal with, people say, oh, you got to deal with your problems. And I think what's meant by that is you got to process hardship in a way that you see it through the lens of Scripture and God's goodness and God's graciousness. So maybe that's taken a step beyond what you're sort of thinking in terms of, maybe like being active in like the gym or active in learning music or language or whatever. But if we're thinking of hardships in general, I definitely think that there is a need that as you come on the other side of hardship, that there is an ability to process that, or there needs to be a time frame to process that biblically. I know for me personally, when I walk through difficult spots, had there not been an ability to actually have a season of really thinking through and processing what this meant, I think I would have just lived in a cycle, like a doom cycle kind of thing. And I wouldn't have grown from it.
Yeah. Instead of avoiding reflecting on the hard thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it's funny because, I've run one marathon in my life. I was 45. I really wanted to run another one, but I don't know. We'll see. When I think about it, the things that I remember about that marathon, the first memories that I have are not the finish, which is interesting because you would think getting past it would be what you would remember.
Yeah.
I had this hard thing in front of me, and I finished it. But that's not it. I remember the 12-mile mark where something started happening in my leg, and I was like, oh no, I'm not even halfway through yet. What am I going to do? And I had to just kind of press that and notice my time was fading a little bit. And I'm like, oh no, I had to press through it. I remember I was probably 16 miles, or no, it was further than that, where we had to run across this bridge, and there was probably a 30-mile-per-hour headwind across this bridge. And maybe it wasn't 30. It felt like it was. It was crazy. And we're all like running across this bridge and like, this is torture. What are we doing? We're pushing. And I remember that. I remember coming up this hill and around a bend, and I remember my family being there cheering me on. I remember that part of it, and that gave me this energy. I remember at 22 miles where I started to fade and thought, I'm going to have to walk. And I said, don't do it. Just keep running. And I saw other people starting to walk. All those parts of it is what I remember that I had to kind of come to terms with. This is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, and then make the decision, okay, well, keep pressing, do something different, or, kind of just where I had to kind of pull myself together, not the getting past it. It's not the end. The destination is not the destination, the finish. The journey is the destination, the actual journey, the hardship, the pressing and pushing. And that's the growth part. The growth part wasn't the finish line. I finished a marathon. Okay, whatever. It's that at 12 miles, I was feeling like, oh no, am I going to be able to keep going? And I was able to. And I think that's so. Translate that into other people's hard things that they do in life. Do them because you realize on the other side, oh, okay, that is something that I can overcome, or that I'm able to get to the other side, but not just. I mean, good grief. The easiest way to finish a marathon is to get in a car and go to the finish line. That's the easiest way. But that's not the journey. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I agree with you. Being able to say, okay, it's the hardship itself that produced good fruit. It wasn't the finish. The finish didn't produce good fruit. It was the hardship. So I had to present that hardship in my life, and I think the same thing for it. It's hard enough to do it for myself. To put hardship, an early alarm clock or an exercise regimen or task list every day or whatever those things are that you do that present some hardship in your life. A cold plunge. That's one of those things that's kind of trendy now. It's cold plunges. Why would you do a cold plunge? Well, it's good for yourself. No, because it's just hard and it's miserable. Yeah. For 30 seconds or a minute or whatever it is. It's even harder to do it in my kid's life. It's really hard to present difficulties and challenges and things that make my kids. I mean, like getting our kids, one of the things that I feel like we are just getting really, really bad at is getting our kids out of the house. And I don't mean that in an insensitive kind of, you just want your kids to leave. No, I don't want I want my kids to grow up. I want them to start thinking about, I want my kids to have their own families one day and have some independence and things like that. And so I think it's really tricky for a lot of people to think about their kids leaving their nest. And I think, okay, why is that? What's happened that we don't want our kids to leave the nest?
Oh, so
sorry.
Two thoughts to what you just shared. I would say one, for guys particularly, I think walking through the hardship also brings respect from other men.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that's an achievement in a young man's life, is earning the respect of your peers because I walk through whatever, That's
a good point.
When I know a guy's going to war and fought for his country, I'm respecting that guy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And I'm going to be willing to put up with stuff from that guy, because of what he's done. Knowing, and that's a high level example, but I think there's probably other smaller, what we might consider smaller examples, that you're going to show respect. And I think that's something that men desire from others, other men particularly. You want the respect of your peers. So I think that's important. In terms of the exit from the house, I agree to an extent. I think some of that's Western culture. that wants to see our kids out pretty quickly, because you don't necessarily see that as widespread in other cultures of the world where, they're still doing challenging things and difficult things and living lives and being men. If we're talking about men,
yeah, I think the two often coincide, and that's the reason why when I say out of the house, I mean grow up, be an adult, take responsibility for yourself, get a job, do things that, do the hard things, even if you're still living at home, pay rent, whatever. Those,
that's what I would say.
Grow up.
Yeah. So I even think for my, I have no problem with my older kids living at home. And I do think there is a time when the dynamic of the relationship would adjust. I have no problem with them being at home, but you're not going to live at home and be like you were at 15 years old.
Yeah.
And mom's not going to pick up after you, and you're not going to have your bed made, and you're going to be responsible for the things that an adult needs to be responsible for. And I think that is a key, is that your mom's not your housekeeper, I'm not your housekeeper, you're going to be responsible. That's where I think Western society really makes the big mistake, when parents rush in. And again, I don't want to be overly critical on small families, but I think it's a product of small families. Parents rushing in, we'll take care of that for you, we're going to do that, we're going to manage that.
Yeah.
You get in this trouble, we'll pay your insurance, we'll pay your taxes, we'll help you with this, we'll help you with that. And I think as you grow up, I really shouldn't have to say to my son or my daughter, it's time for you to do this. They should want to do it.
Right.
And say, Dad, I'm taking care of that. I've got it. No problem.
Yeah.
That's what I want. I want to instill that in my kids at a young age, that when the time comes, whether they're at home or in an apartment or whatever, that they're able to say, I'm taking care of that. I don't need you to do that for me anymore.
Yeah. 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 Scenario that just came to my attention recently, it was just someone who's been through college, took on debt, master's degree, took on debt, and living in a basement. And not really working a fruitful job, kind of looking for employment, but doesn't sound like looking really hard for gainful employment. And I think, okay, I'm sorry. I think there was a breakdown at some point. There's a breakdown somewhere, Well, they can't pay rent because they're paying back their college tuition. And I think, okay, whoa. And so I have a lot to say about that. We're actually, we're probably right up against the time we need to stop. But I think at the root of that is not pulling the feathers out of the nest at the right time. You just didn't, because now it's like, oh shoot, the nest is still really fuzzy and fluffy, and I've got this full grown bird sleeping in my nest, and it's just fluffy, and there, you missed the opportunity to start making it less and less comfortable. And like I said, it's not about moving them out of the house. It's moving them into adulthood, because they are an adult. I don't want to look up to my son like this and say, now listen, you need to make your bed. Okay, by the time I'm looking up at my son, all those things should be a given. All the hard stuff of life should be that it takes to be an adult. That should be a given. And so, but that requires me as a parent and I trust me, I have a hard time not doing everything, picking up everything. I'm the guy that always wants to pick up and clean up and keep things neat and tidy, but it's, I shortcut those.
Parents have to set
growth.
I think you have to set clear boundaries. And so I've got, it's a season of time right now where we have our entire family is back in the house. So it's 9 people in my house right now. And I'm thankful for that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
But I'm also thankful that we're having the conversations. Okay, what is it like for a little while here? And it will be a little while. I mean, it's not going to be a long while.
Yeah.
And just by the nature of, I know how things are moving. But what's that going to look like? What does that look like for our family, and to have adult children who are in careers and focused on that, to be in the home. And again, I want to help my kids in some ways. Like, hey, you want to bank money to put down for a good down payment on a house? I'm happy for you to live at home, but there's responsibilities for living at home, to do that. And I think the difference is when a parent is trying to manage every aspect of their kids and create them from from having any challenges, any difficulties, anything else, you're doing a great disservice.
Yeah,
it is
agreed.
a great disservice.
You're hobbling them.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're giving them, you're putting them in a stroller
But
when they need to be walking and running. Yep. Yep.
And I'll finish. But that has to start when they're 5, 6, 7 years old.
Yeah, I'm thinking with my grandkids, I'm going to start putting them in cold plunges when they're babies. I'm going to say, listen, we're going to train this child up pretty well. When they're 6 months old, I'm going to start putting them in a cold plunge in the morning.
Have you done a cold plunge?
I can barely take a cold shower. That is one thing I'm terrible at.
I don't like it either.
Oh,
but they say
I've never tried a cold plunge.
When you do it, you can't wince. Like if you actually do the cold plunge, to really
okay, well then
have
I'm going
the full effect, you just have to do it. You can't complain, wince, anything. It just has to be. That's controlling.
That might be what I do before next time. But on that note, let's go. Before next time, I'll try to do a cold plunge. No, not before next week. Sometime in the next 6 months. We'll do something like that. How about that? All right. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.